The yoga studio was a sanctuary, a haven where the world outside faded away. As the final notes of the soothing music lingered in the air, I rolled up my mat, feeling the gentle warmth of the afternoon sun filtering through the large windows. It was a place where serenity reigned, yet my heart raced with an unexpected thrill. Jake, the instructor, stood at the front, his presence commanding yet inviting. The way his toned body moved with grace, each pose executed flawlessly, had a magnetic pull. I watched him, captivated. "You did great today," he said with a smile, his blue eyes locking onto mine, sending a shiver down my spine. I could feel the tension building, an electric current that rushed between us. "Thanks, Jake," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've never felt so free." "Would you like to join me for a private session?" he asked, his tone casual, but his gaze intense. My heart skipped a beat. I glanced down, thoughts of David flashing through my mind like a warning sign. He was at home, engrossed in work, completely unaware. Guilt washed over me, but the excitement of Jake's invitation was intoxicating. I don't know," I stammered, biting my lip. "I should really get home." "Just think about it," Jake said, his voice smooth like silk. "It could be just what you need." I nodded, but in the back of my mind, I felt the weight of my choices pressing down on me. The allure of Jake was strong, but so was the creeping guilt that came with the thought of betraying David. What was I getting myself into? I remember the day I decided to try that yoga class. It was a warm afternoon in Los Angeles, and my friend Sarah had been urging me to join her for weeks. "You need to get out of the house more," she said with a playful nudge. "David is always working, and you deserve a break." It was true. David was often lost in his work, and I found myself feeling more alone than ever. "Okay, I'll go," I finally replied, a little hesitant but curious. I had no idea how that decision would change everything. As I entered the studio, the atmosphere wrapped around me like a warm blanket. The air was filled with the scent of lavender, and soft music played in the background. I took a moment to breathe it all in, letting the stresses of my daily life fade away. People were rolling up their mats, their faces relaxed and glowing. But my attention was drawn to Jake, the instructor. Jake was tall, with tousled dark hair and an easy smile that seemed to light up the room. He moved with a grace that was captivating, and as he guided us through the final stretches, I felt a magnetic pull towards him. I could hardly focus on my poses. It was as if the world around us disappeared, and I was the only one in the room. After the class, he approached me. "You did really well today. I'd love to invite you to a private session if you're interested," he said, his voice smooth and inviting. My heart raced. I knew I should decline, but the idea of spending more time with him was intoxicating. Sure. That sounds great," I managed to say, trying to sound casual. In the back of my mind, I felt a twinge of guilt. David was at home, likely still buried in his work, and here I was, considering a private yoga session with a man who made my heart race. As I left the studio, thoughts of David flooded my mind. He was such a good husband, always supportive and kind. But lately, I had felt alone in our relationship, like a shadow drifting through his busy life. I shook my head, trying to push the guilt away. This was just yoga, right? But deep down, I knew it was more than that. The excitement of the unknown stirred something in me that I hadn't felt in a long time. The next day, I found myself standing in front of the studio again, my heart pounding. I had almost turned back, but another part of me craved this new experience. As I walked inside, Jake greeted me with that same warm smile, and everything else faded away. "Ready to get started?" he asked, his eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "Absolutely," I replied, feeling a thrill of anticipation. His presence filled the room, and I found myself getting lost in the moment. The yoga session was intimate, the air thick with an unspoken tension that crackled between us. Jake moved closer to adjust my posture, his hands brushing against my skin, sending shivers down my spine. "Just breathe," he whispered, his voice low and soothing. I took a deep breath, my body responding to him in ways I couldn't explain. We chatted easily, but the conversation quickly shifted to flirting, charged with an energy that made my head spin. "Do you come here often?" he asked, a playful smile dancing on his lips. "Only since you started teaching," I replied, my cheeks flushing. Our eyes locked, and for a moment, the world outside the studio ceased to exist. I could feel the tension building, and just as I thought I might explode from it, he stepped back, breaking the spell. "Let's take a break," he suggested, a knowing look in his eyes. As I left the studio that day, I felt exhilarated, yet tormented by guilt. David was waiting for me at home, completely unaware of the chaos brewing in my heart. The thought of lying to him about where I had been gnawed at me. "Did you have fun?" David asked, looking up from his laptop as I walked in. "Yeah, it was good," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just a class." I could see the trust in his eyes, and it made my chest tighten with guilt. But the excitement of Jake lingered in my mind like a drug I couldn't shake. Later that night, I found myself staring at my phone, my heart racing as I typed a message to Jake. "Thanks for today. I really enjoyed it." I hit send, and the adrenaline surged through me as I awaited his response. When it came, my heart leapt. "I did too. Let's do it again soon." I felt a rush of excitement, but it was quickly followed by a wave of guilt. What was I doing? I was crossing lines I never thought I would. As the days passed, I couldn't help but look forward to our sessions, each one more intense than the last. The connection between us deepened, and I found myself craving his presence more and more. "Maybe we could grab coffee sometime," Jake suggested one day, a mischievous glint in his eye. I hesitated but felt an undeniable pull. "Sure, that sounds nice." I kept telling myself it was harmless, just coffee. But every time I saw him, the line between right and wrong blurred further. I was swept up in this whirlwind, and the guilt of my hidden life grew heavier. But I couldn't stop. The thrill of being with Jake, the way he made me feel alive, was intoxicating. And as much as I tried to push the thoughts of David aside, I knew I was stepping into dangerous territory, one I might not be able to return from. The yoga studio was a sanctuary of calm, the air thick with the lingering scent of sandalwood and the soft hum of nature-infused music. As the final minutes of class drifted by, I could feel the tension of the day melt away, replaced by a sense of peace. I rolled up my mat, my mind still swirling with the echoes of deep breaths and gentle stretches when I first saw him. Jake, the instructor, stood at the front of the room, his presence lighting up the space. He had an effortless charm, with tousled hair and a smile that seemed to radiate warmth. As he moved through the last few poses, I couldn't help but admire the way his body flowed, each movement deliberate, like poetry in motion. My heart raced a little faster, and I quickly looked down, feeling a warmth creep up my cheeks. "Great job today, everyone," he said, his voice smooth and inviting. "I'd love to invite anyone interested to join me for a private session. It's a chance to deepen your practice." The moment he spoke those words, my heart skipped a beat. I glanced around the room, noticing the other women who seemed just as captivated as I was. I felt an inexplicable pull towards him, an urge to say yes, to step into a space that was just the two of us. As the class wrapped up, I approached him, my voice a little shaky. "I'd like to join the private session," I said, trying to sound confident. "Perfect," he replied, his smile widening. "How about tomorrow at 5? "Sounds good," I managed to say, but inside, a storm of emotions brewed. The thought of my husband, David, waiting for me at home, engrossed in his work, sent a wave of guilt crashing over me. I shook my head, trying to dispel the thoughts that whispered of betrayal. The next day arrived, and I found myself standing in the studio again, heart pounding as I waited for Jake. The atmosphere was entirely different now, charged with an intimacy that made the air thick and heavy. The studio felt smaller, the silence louder. When Jake walked in, the world seemed to narrow down to just him and me. "Ready to dive deeper?" he asked, his voice low and smooth. I nodded, unable to find my words. As we began, he moved closer, adjusting my posture with a gentle touch that sent shivers down my spine. "Relax your shoulders," he whispered, his fingers grazing my skin. The connection between us was electric, each adjustment feeling more intimate than the last. I caught myself leaning into his touch, wanting more. The conversation started out casual, but quickly shifted to something more flirtatious. "I've got to say, you have a natural talent for this," he said, a playful glint in his eye. "Thanks. I guess I'm just trying to keep up with you," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper, the tension between us thickening. Our eyes locked, and the air hummed with something unspoken. I felt my breath hitch, and for a moment, I forgot about everything else. My home, David, the life I had built. It was just Jake and me, the world outside fading away. "Do you feel that?" he asked suddenly, his gaze intense. "What?" I breathed, my heart racing. "The chemistry," he said, a smirk playing on his lips. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. I started, but my voice trailed off as I struggled against the tide of attraction pulling me towards him. "You don't have to say anything," he said softly. "Just enjoy the moment." And I did. I allowed myself to breathe, to sink into the warmth of his presence. But as I left the studio that day, the exhilaration of our session was quickly overshadowed by the guilt that gnawed at me. David would be waiting at home, completely unaware. As I walked to my car, I felt a mix of thrill and dread. This was new territory for me, and while the excitement was intoxicating, the guilt felt like a heavy cloak draped over my shoulders. I couldn't shake the image of David, his trust in me unwavering, while I was flirting with the edge of betrayal. Yet, as I glanced back at the studio, I could still feel Jake's touch lingering on my skin, the spark between us undeniable. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. As the yoga class concluded, the soft music faded into silence, and the warm, inviting atmosphere of the studio wrapped around me like a gentle embrace. The scent of lavender lingered in the air, mingling with the crispness of freshly rolled mats and the faint hint of sweat. I took a deep breath, relishing the calm that washed over me, but the moment was fleeting. My gaze was drawn to Jake, the instructor, who stood at the front, his presence illuminating the room. He had an effortless charm that made my heart race. "Great work today, everyone," he said, his voice smooth and confident. I felt a flutter in my stomach, a mix of admiration and something I dared not name. I couldn't help but notice the way his muscles moved under his fitted shirt as he demonstrated a final pose. As the class filtered out, Jake caught my eye, a spark of something unspoken flickering between us. "Would you like to come for a private session sometime?" he asked, his gaze steady and inviting. My breath hitched. I hesitated, a wave of guilt crashing over me like a cold shower. David was at home, oblivious to the turmoil brewing inside me. I'll think about it," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "Take your time," he smiled, and I felt the heat rising to my cheeks. I left the studio that day, the weight of my decision pressing down on me. The image of David, sitting in his office, consumed by his work, flashed through my mind. I felt a pang of guilt. How could I even consider this? The days that followed were a haze of confusion. I had almost convinced myself to forget about the invitation when a text message from Jake buzzed on my phone. It was innocent enough, simply a follow-up about the upcoming classes. But it ignited something within me. I found myself responding more quickly than I should have, the thrill of our exchanges sending shivers down my spine. "Hey, I hope you're feeling good after class," he wrote one evening. "Thanks. I am, actually. You made it fun," I replied, my fingers trembling slightly as I hit send. His response came almost immediately. "I'm glad to hear that. You have great energy. We should definitely explore that in a private session." I bit my lip, my heart racing. Each message was like a small secret, a thrill I didn't know I craved. I felt exhilarated, but the guilt gnawed at me. I couldn't let David find out. He was so dedicated, so trusting. But as my phone buzzed with another message from Jake, I found myself hiding it from David, who was sitting across the room, engrossed in his laptop. I felt like I was living a double life, one filled with excitement and the other steeped in responsibility. Jake invited me out for coffee, and before I could think it through, I said yes. "Let's meet at that little cafe near the beach," he suggested. My heart raced at the thought of being with him outside the studio, in a more personal setting. "I'll be there," I typed back, the thrill of anticipation coursing through me. I could hardly focus on anything else that day. When the day finally arrived, I chose a simple outfit, something casual but flattering. As I walked into the cafe, I spotted Jake instantly. He looked even better outside of the yoga studio, his relaxed smile igniting a fire deep within me. "You look amazing," he said, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "Thanks, you too," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. We talked and laughed over coffee, the atmosphere casual, yet charged with an undercurrent of tension. "Do you want to take a walk? The beach is just a few minutes away," he suggested, and I found myself nodding eagerly. As we strolled along the shore, the sun started to set, casting a golden glow over everything. I felt free, alive, as if I had stepped into a world where nothing else mattered. We turned to face each other, and in that moment, I could see the desire in his eyes mirrored in my own. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice low and husky. My heart raced, and I barely nodded before he closed the distance between us. The kiss was electric, sending shockwaves through my body. It was everything I had been longing for, yet everything I knew I shouldn't want. As I pulled away, breathless and slightly dazed, the reality of my life crashed down on me. David was still at home, waiting for me. "I shouldn't have done that," I said, guilt flooding my veins. "I know. But it felt right, didn't it?" Jake replied, his voice soothing yet filled with longing. I looked into his eyes, seeing the same turmoil reflected back at me. "I can't do this," I said, my heart pounding. "I have a husband." "I understand, but you deserve to feel this way, to explore what's between us," he urged. The weight of his words hung in the air, and I was torn between my loyalty to David and the undeniable connection I felt with Jake. As I walked home that evening, my heart was heavy with conflicting emotions. I was entranced by Jake, yet guilt consumed me. I didn't want to hurt David, but the thrill of my secret with Jake was intoxicating. The decision loomed before me, and I knew I stood at a crossroads, one that would change everything. I stepped into the yoga studio, the soothing scent of lavender filling the air. The class had just ended, and my body felt relaxed, yet my mind was racing. I had come here to escape my everyday life, to find a moment of peace, but instead, I was met with an unexpected thrill. Jake, the instructor, stood at the front of the room, his presence lighting up the space in a way that felt almost electric. He had a way of moving that drew my eyes to him, and I couldn't help but feel a flutter in my stomach every time our gazes met. As the last of my classmates rolled up their mats and chatted among themselves, I felt a magnetic pull towards Jake. He caught my eye, a hint of a smile playing on his lips as he approached me. "You were great today," he said, his voice low and smooth. "I can see you've been practicing." "Thanks," I replied, feeling a blush warm my cheeks. I was flattered, but that wasn't all I felt. There was something in the way he looked at me, something that made my heart race and my thoughts scatter. Then he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Would you like to join me for a private session? We could work on some techniques tailored just for you." The invitation hung in the air, heavy with possibility. I glanced around the room, half expecting someone to interrupt, to pull me back to reality, but it was just us. I hesitated, the image of my husband, David, flashing in my mind. He was at home, likely buried in work, utterly unaware of the turmoil brewing inside me. I felt a pang of guilt, but the excitement of Jake's offer overshadowed it. I'll think about it," I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. Jake's smile widened, and I could see the challenge in his eyes. "No pressure, just let me know." He stepped back, giving me space, but the tension lingered, crackling between us like static electricity. As I left the studio, I fought against the mix of emotions swirling within me. I thought of David, my loyal husband, who had always supported me, who believed in the life we were building together. The guilt gnawed at me, but the thrill of the unknown tugged me in another direction. I had been feeling a bit lost lately, trapped in the monotony of my routine. Was it so wrong to seek a spark, even if it meant flirting with danger? The next day, I found myself sitting at home, my phone in hand, staring at Jake's message. I had finally decided. I would go to that private session. I needed to escape, to feel something that wasn't tied to my responsibilities. When I walked into the studio again, the atmosphere felt different. The air was thick with unspoken tension. Jake was already there, stretching on his mat, and when he saw me, his face lit up with a smile that made my heart skip a beat. "Glad you came," he said, his eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "Thanks for having me," I replied, trying to sound casual, but I could feel the weight of my decision settling over me. We began our session, and with every movement, every adjustment he made, my body responded instinctively to his presence. "You're really flexible," he commented, brushing his hand lightly against my back to help me with my posture. His touch sent a jolt of electricity through me. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks as I tried to focus, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. Our conversation flowed easily, and I found myself laughing at his jokes, feeling more at ease with each passing moment. But there was an undercurrent of something more, an attraction that neither of us was openly acknowledging. As our session came to an end, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. "You should come back next week," Jake suggested, his eyes locking onto mine. "I can show you some advanced techniques." "Definitely," I replied, my heart racing at the prospect. As I gathered my things, I felt the weight of my decision settling in. I was flirting with danger, with something that could unravel my carefully crafted life. That night, I lay in bed next to David, feeling the guilt creep back in. He turned to me, his eyes heavy with sleep. "You seem distant," he murmured, concern lacing his voice. "I'm just tired," I said, forcing a smile. But deep down, I knew I was hiding something monumental. I was stepping into a world that could change everything, and with every moment I spent with Jake, the line between right and wrong blurred further. I was caught in a whirlwind of excitement and guilt, and I couldn't help but wonder where this path would lead me. Would I dare to cross that line, embracing the passion that was calling out to me? Or would I retreat back into the safety of my life with David, leaving the thrill behind? The choice felt impossibly heavy, yet I knew that I was already leaning towards the edge, and the jump felt exhilarating. The yoga studio was a sanctuary, a place where the world outside faded away, leaving only the soothing sounds of soft music and the scent of lavender lingering in the air. The last notes of the chime echoed as the class came to an end, and I rolled up my mat, feeling a mix of relaxation and a flutter of something else, something unexpected. As I turned, I caught sight of Jake. He stood at the front of the room, his dark hair slightly tousled, a warm smile playing on his lips as he thanked everyone for attending. His presence lit up the space, making it feel alive. I felt a rush of heat in my cheeks as he caught my eye, and for a moment, the world around us blurred. "Great job today," he said, his voice smooth and inviting. "I can see you've been practicing." "Thanks," I replied, my voice a little shaky. "I'm still trying to get the hang of it." He stepped closer, the space between us charged with a tension that sent shivers down my spine. "You could use some extra guidance. How about a private session sometime?" My heart raced at his suggestion, every part of me screaming to accept. But then, there was David, my husband, who was waiting for me at home, completely unaware of this turmoil brewing inside me. "That sounds nice," I managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady. "But I'm not sure I can." "Why not? It would be just the two of us," Jake insisted, his eyes holding mine with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. "I could help you improve faster. I promise it'll be worth it." I hesitated, guilt creeping in. "I don't want to take advantage of your time." He smiled, a devilish glint in his eyes. "Trust me, I wouldn't offer if I didn't want to." I bit my lip, the weight of my marriage pressing down on me. David was a good man, dedicated to his work and to me. I could picture him now, probably buried in papers, oblivious to my internal struggle. Yet, the idea of a private session with Jake felt like a siren's call, pulling me in deeper, tempting me to give in to desires I had buried for too long. "Okay," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Let's do it." That evening, the thought of our upcoming session kept me awake. David was snoring softly beside me, and I felt a pang of guilt as I glanced at his peaceful face. He trusted me completely. Little did he know, I was about to step into a world that could unravel everything we built together. The next day arrived, and I found myself nervously fidgeting before leaving for the studio. My friend had been the one to suggest Jake's class. "You'll love him," she had said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. I had been hesitant to leave David alone, but something about the freedom of that first class had awakened a part of me I thought was long gone. When I entered the studio, Jake was already there, stretching on his mat. Our eyes met, and I felt a rush of exhilaration mixed with apprehension. "Ready for your private lesson?" he asked, his voice low and inviting. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, forcing a smile. The studio felt so intimate, just the two of us. As he guided me through the poses, his hands brushed against my skin, igniting sparks that set my heart racing. "You're doing great," he murmured, adjusting my posture gently, his fingers lingering just a heartbeat too long. Every touch sent a thrill through me, and I tried to focus on my breath, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the fact that I was betraying David, who was so unaware of my growing infatuation. Jake's playful banter soon turned into something more charged, our conversations dancing around the lines of professionalism and flirtation. "Do you always make your students feel this special?" I teased, trying to lighten the mood as I felt a flush creeping up my neck. He chuckled, his eyes glinting with mischief. "Only the ones who show promise." That comment hung in the air, thick with tension. I could feel the unspoken words swirling between us, the air practically crackling with attraction. When our eyes locked, it felt like the world outside had faded away, and there was no one else but us. "Maybe we should do this more often," I suggested, my heart pounding in my chest. "Count on it," he replied, a smirk playing on his lips. As the session came to a close, I knew I had crossed a line. The thrill of our connection was intoxicating, but the guilt was suffocating. I left the studio with a mix of excitement and dread, knowing I had opened a door that could not be closed. Later that night, as I sat across from David at dinner, I felt the weight of my secret pressing down on me. He was animatedly talking about his day, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I smiled and nodded, but my mind kept drifting back to Jake's touch, his laughter, and the undeniable chemistry we shared. As David reached across the table to squeeze my hand, I felt a pang of guilt. How could I look him in the eye while keeping this secret? Yet, part of me craved the thrill of this new life, a life filled with passion and risk. I was living a dual existence, and although it terrified me, it was also exhilarating. And with every secret outing to the studio, with every stolen moment with Jake, the thrill only intensified. The lies stacked up like bricks, creating a wall between my two worlds, and I was both terrified and exhilarated by the life I was building on the other side. The air in the yoga studio was thick with the sweet scent of sandalwood and the soft sounds of chimes as the class came to an end. I slowly unrolled my mat, my mind still drifting through the poses we had just completed. The calming atmosphere wrapped around me like a warm blanket, but there was a spark of something else, something electrifying that I couldn't quite place. And then there was Jake, there. He stood at the front of the studio. His presence lit up the room in a way that made it hard to focus on anything else. His dark hair fell slightly over his forehead, and when he smiled, it felt like the world outside faded away. As he walked towards me, I felt my heartbeat quicken, an unexpected thrill coursing through me. "Great class today," he said, his voice smooth and inviting. "You really have a natural talent for this." "Thank you," I replied, trying to keep my tone steady. "I'm still learning." He stepped closer, the space between us charged with an unspoken tension. "I can see that. If you want, I can offer you a private session. We can focus on your technique." A private session? My heart raced at the thought, but then the image of David flashed in my mind. He was at home, likely buried in work, utterly unaware of the stirrings inside me. Guilt washed over me, but it was quickly overshadowed by a sense of longing. That sounds great," I heard myself say, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'd like that." Jake's smile widened, and as he wrote down his number on a piece of paper, I felt a rush of excitement mixed with dread. "Text me, and we'll set it up," he said, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my breath hitch. As I left the studio, I felt a strange mix of exhilaration and guilt. I had always been the good wife, the devoted partner to David. But now, I was stepping into uncharted territory, and a part of me was curious about what lay ahead. The next day, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my phone as the sun streamed through the window. David was in his office, engrossed in work as usual. He hardly noticed me. "Are you going to the yoga class again?" he asked absent-mindedly, glancing up for just a moment. "Yeah, I think so," I replied, forcing a casual tone. My heart raced at the thought of seeing Jake again. I could feel the weight of my decision pressing down on me, but there was a thrill in the air that I couldn't ignore. Later, as I drove to the studio, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. The moment I stepped into the familiar space, the atmosphere seemed to shift. I could feel Jake's gaze on me, even before I saw him. The instant our eyes met, A jolt of attraction coursed through me. It was undeniable and intoxicating. "Hey there," he greeted, his voice low and inviting. "Ready for some one-on-one time?" I nodded, feeling a rush of adrenaline. "Absolutely." As we moved through the session, the intimacy of the empty studio surrounded us. With every adjustment he made, his hands brushed against my skin, igniting sparks that danced through my body. "You're really getting the hang of this," he said, his breath warm against my ear. "Just relax and trust me." "Easy for you to say," I teased, trying to lighten the tension that was building. But inside, I was a bundle of nerves, excitement, and guilt. Our conversation flowed easily, mingling with flirty remarks that made my pulse race. "You should come to my class more often," he said, his eyes glinting with mischief. "I could show you a few more advanced poses." The heat of his gaze made my heart race, and I could feel my cheeks flush. "I think I'd like that," I replied, biting my lip, a part of me daring to imagine what else he might teach me. The moment our eyes locked, the air thickened with unspoken words. Time stood still as I lost myself in the depths of his gaze. I could almost hear the whispers of temptation, urging me to cross a line I had never intended to approach. After that session, our communication shifted. We exchanged numbers, and soon the text began. Each ping of my phone sent a thrill through me, a rush of adrenaline that I desperately craved. I found myself sneaking glances at my phone, hiding it from David as he worked late into the night. Then came the first invitation for an outing outside of the studio. "How about coffee tomorrow? Just the two of us," Jake texted one evening. My stomach fluttered at the prospect, but guilt crept in again. David was home, oblivious as ever. "I can't," I typed back, my fingers hovering over the keys, torn between right and wrong. But as I contemplated, a part of me screamed to live a little. "Why not? It's just coffee," Jake replied, and I could almost hear the teasing tone in his voice. "You deserve a break." "Okay," I sent back, my heart racing. I had made my choice. The cafe we chose was small and tucked away, the perfect spot for a secret rendezvous. As I entered, Jake was already there, waiting. His smile lit up my insides, and I felt a thrill of excitement. The conversation flowed easily, laughter bubbling between us, but the air was thick with something more, something electric. "Let's take a walk," he suggested as we finished our drinks. We strolled towards the beach, the salty breeze wrapping around us. The moment felt surreal, each step closer to something I knew I shouldn't pursue. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Jake turned to me, his gaze intense. "You know, I've been thinking about you a lot," he admitted, his voice low, and before I could process what was happening, he leaned in, capturing my lips with his in a kiss that sent shockwaves through my entire being. It was unexpected, thrilling, and utterly intoxicating. I melted into him, forgetting everything else for just a moment. But as the kiss deepened, the thought of David lurked in the back of my mind, a reminder of the life I was leaving behind. Yet in that moment, the pull of temptation was too strong. I was lost in the intensity of Jake, and I couldn't bring myself to turn away. I was caught in a whirlwind of passion, and there was no turning back. The yoga studio was a sanctuary, bathed in soft light and filled with the gentle scent of lavender. As the class wrapped up, the air felt thick with a sense of calm, yet there was an undercurrent of something electric. I rolled up my mat, trying to shake off the lingering tension from the day. That's when I caught sight of him, Jake, the instructor. He stood at the front, his presence commanding yet soothing, a perfect mix of strength and grace. The way he moved, the way he smiled, made the room feel brighter, warmer. "Great job today, everyone," he said, his voice smooth like honey. "If anyone wants to deepen their practice, I'm offering private sessions." The way he looked at me when he said those words made my heart race. I could feel the eyes of the other students on us, but it was just the two of us in that moment. I hesitated, my mind racing. What would David think? He was home, likely buried in his work, oblivious to my internal struggle. The guilt crept in like a shadow, but the allure of Jake was undeniable. "I'd love to," I found myself saying, my voice barely above a whisper. "Perfect," Jake replied, a smirk playing at the corners of his lips. "Let's schedule something for later this week." As he handed me his number, our fingers brushed. I felt a jolt of energy shoot through me, igniting something I hadn't felt in years. As I drove home, the guilt gnawed at me. I shouldn't be feeling this way about anyone other than David. He was my husband, my partner. But the memory of Jake's smile lingered, and I couldn't help but replay the moment over and over in my mind. It felt thrilling and terrifying all at once. Later that night, I sat across from David at dinner, forcing a smile. He was talking animatedly about a project at work, his passion shining through. I should have felt content, but instead, I felt like a stranger in my own life. "How was yoga?" he asked, looking at me with those warm brown eyes. "It was good," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Jake is a great instructor." David nodded, but I could see a flicker of something in his gaze. Suspicion, perhaps? I quickly changed the subject, but the tension lingered. That week, I found myself counting down the days until my first private session with Jake. I felt like a moth drawn to a flame. Each time I thought of our upcoming meeting, my heart raced, and my palms grew sweaty. Yet the guilt was there, lurking in the back of my mind. When the day finally arrived, I walked into the studio, my heart pounding. The room was empty, save for Jake, who stood waiting with that confident smile. "Ready to explore?" he asked, his voice smooth and inviting. I nodded, though my throat felt dry. The intimacy of the empty studio wrapped around us like a cocoon. As we began, Jake moved closer, his hands gently adjusting my posture. I could feel the warmth radiating from him, and every touch sent shivers down my spine. "Relax," he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. The way he spoke to me, as if I was the only one in the world, made me forget everything else. We chatted between poses, the conversation flowing easily. But soon the light banter shifted, and I could sense the heat between us growing. Our eyes locked, and in that moment, every ounce of restraint slipped away. "Is this okay?" he asked, his voice low and filled with something raw and primal. I should have known better, but all I could think about was how alive I felt in his presence. "Yes," I whispered, and that one word opened the floodgates. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of stolen moments and hidden texts. I found myself caught in a thrilling game of deception. The thrill of sneaking around, hiding my phone, and sending flirty messages became an addictive rush. The guilt was always there, lurking in the shadows, but the excitement of my newfound connection with Jake dulled its edges. Then came the day when Jake suggested we meet outside the studio. "How about a coffee?" he had asked, his eyes sparkling with mischief. The thought of going out with him sent butterflies fluttering in my stomach. I knew I should say no, but the pull was too strong. "Sure," I replied, my heart racing. We chose a small cafe, hidden away from prying eyes. The atmosphere was light, but the air between us crackled with tension. As we talked, I could feel the chemistry building, and it felt intoxicating. "Let's take a walk," Jake suggested, standing and offering his hand. I took it, feeling the warmth of his skin against mine. As we strolled along the beach, the sun dipping below the horizon, everything felt perfect. Then, without warning, he turned to me and kissed me. It was electrifying, a spark igniting between us that I had never felt before. I knew it was wrong. I knew I should pull away. But instead, I leaned into the kiss, losing myself in the moment. With each encounter, the lies piled up. I crafted excuses, telling David I was running errands or catching up with friends. The guilt clawed at me every time I saw him, but the thrill of being with Jake was intoxicating. As the weeks passed, my feelings for Jake deepened, and so did the complexity of my situation. I felt torn between two worlds, one of comfort and familiarity with David, and another of passion and excitement with Jake. Each time I thought about David, I felt the weight of my choices pressing down on me. But the allure of Jake was too strong to resist. I was living on the edge, and I didn't want it to end. The thrill of our secret encounters became my escape, a way to feel alive, in ways I hadn't for years. Yet I knew that this path was fraught with danger, and with each stolen kiss, I was plunging deeper into a world of betrayal. I stepped off my mat, the gentle hum of relaxation still clinging to the air as the yoga class came to a close. The soft, soothing music faded, and I noticed the light filtering through the large windows, casting a warm glow across the studio. My heart raced as I caught sight of Jake, the instructor. He stood at the front, exuding a magnetic energy that seemed to illuminate the space. His dark hair fell perfectly over his forehead, and his deep blue eyes sparkled with a hint of mischief as he smiled at the class. "Great job today, everyone. Remember to stretch and breathe," he said, his voice smooth and inviting. I felt my breath hitch as our eyes locked for a brief moment. There was an undeniable spark, something electric that made the air around us feel thick and charged. As the other students began to file out, I lingered, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hey, would you like to join me for a private session sometime? I could help you refine your practice," Jake said, his tone casual, but with an underlying intensity that made my skin tingle. The invitation sent a rush of warmth through me, igniting a mixture of excitement and dread. I thought of David, my husband, who was likely at home, engrossed in his work, and completely unaware of the turmoil brewing inside me. Sure. I'd love that," I managed to reply, though my voice felt shaky. I was surprised by my own eagerness, my mind racing with thoughts of what this could mean. Could I really go through with it? The guilt began to seep in like a cold wave, crashing against the walls I had built around my heart. I could almost hear David's laughter echoing in my mind, reminding me of the bond we'd forged over the years. As I left the studio, the warm sun felt like a cruel reminder of my predicament. I found myself replaying the moment in my head, the way Jake's smile had lit up the room, the way he had looked at me, as if I was the only person there. It was intoxicating, yet terrifying. I shook my head, trying to dispel the thoughts of him. My heart ached with the weight of the decision I was making, the tug of war between desire and loyalty. Later that evening, I sat on the couch with David. He was immersed in a report for work, his brow furrowed in concentration. I watched him, feeling a pang of guilt as the memory of Jake's invitation replayed in my mind. "Everything okay?" he asked, glancing up at me with those warm brown eyes that had always made me feel safe. "Yeah, just thinking," I replied, forcing a smile. But inside, I was a whirlwind of emotions. The thought of Jake was like a flame, drawing me in with undeniable force, yet the guilt of betraying David loomed like a dark shadow. The next day, I found myself standing in front of the yoga studio again, my heart racing with anticipation and nerves. My friend had convinced me to try Jake's class, despite my hesitation. "Come on, it'll be fun. You need to break away from the routine," she had insisted. I had almost backed out, the image of David's trusting smile haunting me. But the thought of Jake was too strong. When I first laid eyes on Jake, My breath hitched. He was even more captivating up close, his presence commanding yet inviting. As the class began, I felt a rush of freedom, something I hadn't felt in a long time. With every pose, I could feel the tension of my everyday life slip away, replaced by an exhilarating sense of possibility. Jake moved around the room, adjusting students' postures, and when he reached me, our eyes locked again. "Perfect," he said softly, his hands brushing against my waist as he helped me align my pose. I felt a jolt of electricity where he touched me, and I wondered if he could feel the chemistry sparking between us. "Thanks," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. I could feel the warmth of his body close to mine, a dangerous proximity that made my heart race. The air was thick with unspoken tension, and I caught myself wanting to lean in just a little closer. After class, he approached me again. "So, about that private session?" he started, his eyes glinting with mischief. "Let's do it," I blurted out, surprising myself with my eagerness. As I walked home that day, I felt exhilarated and terrified. I was stepping into uncharted territory, and each step felt like a leap into the unknown. The thrill of the new experience was intoxicating, but the thought of David waiting at home gnawed at me. I picked up my phone, my heart racing as I texted Jake later that night. "What time works for you?" It was a simple message, but it felt like I was opening the floodgates to something irreversible. When I received his reply, my heart raced. "How about tomorrow at noon? The studio will be quiet." I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Was I really ready for this? I thought of David, and the guilt washed over me. But the thrill of the secret, the allure of doing something forbidden, was overpowering. "Sounds good," I typed back, my thumb hovering over the send button for a moment longer than necessary. I pressed send, and a wave of adrenaline coursed through me. As I lay in bed that night, I felt the weight of my choices pressing down on me. I thought about how different things could be, how much I craved the thrill of something new. The moment I closed my eyes, images of Jake filled my mind, and the guilt faded into the background, replaced by a longing I had never allowed myself to feel before. I was stepping into a world where I could be more than just a wife, more than just a shadow of what I had become. The yoga studio was a sanctuary, a place where the outside world faded away, and the air was thick with the scent of lavender and sandalwood. As the final notes of the calming music faded, I rolled up my mat and glanced around, feeling the warm glow of relaxation wrap around me. That's when I saw him, Jake, the instructor. His presence lit up the room like a sunrise breaking through the dawn. He exuded confidence, his dark hair falling effortlessly over his forehead, and his deep-set eyes seemed to see right through me. "Great class today, everyone," he announced, his voice smooth and inviting. "Remember, if you want to deepen your practice, I offer private sessions." The way he looked at me made my heart race. I could feel an electric tension in the air, a pull that was impossible to ignore. As I gathered my things, Jake approached me. "You were really in the zone today. I'd love to work with you one-on-one. What do you say?" My stomach flipped. I knew I should say no. I was married to David, a man who worked tirelessly to provide for us. I thought of him at home, probably buried in paperwork, completely unaware of the turmoil brewing inside me. I'll think about it," I replied, trying to sound casual, but my voice trembled slightly. "Take your time," Jake said, his smile both reassuring and dangerous. "Just know it could be a great opportunity for you." I nodded, but as I left the studio, the guilt crept in like a shadow. Why was I even considering this? David was good to me. He was everything I thought I wanted. And yet, the thought of being alone with Jake sent a thrill through me that I hadn't felt in years. That night, I lay in bed beside David, listening to his steady breathing. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing back to Jake's invitation. My heart ached with conflicting emotions. I had never thought of myself as the type to stray, yet the very idea of those private sessions left me feeling exhilarated and terrified. The next day, I received a text from a friend inviting me to try Jake's yoga class. "You have to come. It's amazing," she insisted. I hesitated at first. What about David? I thought. He was busy with work, and I knew he wouldn't mind me taking a couple of hours for myself. So, I went. The moment I walked into the studio, I felt a sense of freedom wash over me. The air was thick with anticipation. And then I saw him. Our eyes locked, and it was as if the world around us disappeared. The chemistry was undeniable, and I felt a magnetic pull towards him. "Glad you could make it," Jake said, his voice smooth like honey. "Me too," I replied, my heart racing. The class was intense, and as we flowed through the poses, I couldn't help but notice how his gaze lingered on me, the way his hands brushed against my back when he adjusted my posture. Each touch ignited something inside me, something I thought had long been extinguished. After class, Jake approached me again. "I have a few slots open for private sessions this week. Would you like to join?" I hesitated, a wave of guilt crashing over me. What would I say to David? But in that moment, the thrill of rebellion overpowered my sense of duty. "All right, let's do it." The decision felt like stepping off the edge of a cliff, and I loved it. As the week progressed, our conversations became more frequent, and I felt the rush of adrenaline each time I texted him. I hid my phone from David, my heart racing with excitement and fear. "What are you up to?" he would ask, and I would smile, lying through my teeth. "Just chatting with a friend." My heart raced at the thought of our first private session. I imagined the intimacy of the studio, just the two of us. The thrill of secrecy made me feel alive. "We should meet outside of class," Jake suggested one evening after our session. "Just to talk." "Sure," I managed to reply, my stomach fluttering with nerves. We decided on a quaint little cafe, a place that felt safe, yet charged with unspoken tension. The conversation flowed easily, but I could feel the air thickening with desire as he leaned closer. "Have you ever thought about breaking the rules?" Jake asked, his eyes piercing mine. "Sometimes," I admitted, my heart pounding. "What if we broke a few tonight?" he said, his voice low and inviting. Before I knew it, we were walking along the beach, the sun setting behind us, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. As we paused, he turned to me, his expression intense. "Can I?" he asked softly, just before his lips met mine. It was unexpected, electric, and I kissed him back, succumbing to the passion I had been holding back for far too long. In that moment, with the waves crashing in the background and the world around us fading away, I made my choice. I was drawn into a whirlwind of emotion and desire, feeling alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. But as I returned home that night, the weight of my actions pressed down on me. David was still there, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I could see the concern in his eyes as he asked about my evening. "Just a late coffee with a friend," I said, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. The tension between my new reality with Jake and the life I had built with David grew heavier. I was caught in a web of excitement and guilt, and every day felt like a balancing act. Each stolen moment with Jake was intoxicating, but the lies were beginning to pile up, threatening to unravel everything I had known. Then one evening, Jake leaned in close, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "What if we took this further? I want you to be bold with me," he murmured. The thrill of his words sent chills down my spine. I found myself nodding, a part of me eager for the adventure, while another part screamed for me to stop. I could feel the lines between my two worlds blurring, the safety of my marriage fading against the passion I craved. "Let's meet at the studio after hours," he suggested, his voice low and enticing. The idea sent a rush of fear and excitement through me. I knew it was reckless, but the thought of being alone with Jake, of breaking all the rules, was a temptation I couldn't resist. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my decision. I was about to step into a world where passion ruled, and everything I had known would be tested.